Written by Clarkinator69. Nobody believes the boy with the overactive imagination. Nobody believes the man who will forever shoulder the lamentable stigma of having once been institutionalized. I was the former once, but regrettably always be the latter now. Nobody ever believed me. I've been told I have episodes, that I don't always know what's real, that I'm delusional and paranoid, that I, and I alone, killed my brother. But I know the truth. I didn't kill my brother. It was the Riverbank Boy. He has stalked me ever since, determined to finish off the job. Drowning one brother isn't enough for him. He isn't going to rest until he has condemned both brothers to a watery grave. I was a skittish and nervous child growing up. The dark terrified me, as is to be expected at a young age, but I was also terrified of getting in the water. While other kids were taking swim lessons, I was one of the cowardly few who sat out. I had, and still have, a mortal fear of the water. So it was a particularly cruel stunt by my older brother Derek to tell me about the Riverbank Boy, just a day before my first family camping trip. I was only 6 years old then, and my parents hoped that the beautiful natural scenery of flowing water would help assuage my fear. That it would be such a gorgeous visual feast that I'd forget my fears and revel in all of nature, water included. But any faint hopes my parents had were quickly subverted by my brother's humor at my expense. "Watch out for the Riverbank Boy while you're out in those woods, James," he had said. I asked him what that was. "Oh, he's a young boy, probably just a couple years older than you. Years ago he drowned in the river. He spends his time in the river and on the bank. Maybe, if you're lucky, he'll be busy. He might be eating a fish or relaxing or maybe even skipping rocks. If so, don't disturb him. If you do, his face will take on a look of rage. He'll chase you down, drag you to the river, and drown you." I was freaking out by now, but Derek wasn't finished. "Or maybe you'll see him bathing in the river, in which case he'll invite you in. Don't get in with him, he'll drown you. But maybe, just maybe, you won't see him at all. In that case, he's below the water, waiting to drag you to a watery grave. Almost like a crocodile in those nature shows you watch. Be careful, James. Stay away from the water, or the Riverbank Boy will get you." He lunged forward and grabbed my arm to emphasize the fright of that last part, and I screamed and he laughed. I refused to take my bath that night. I was afraid the Riverbank Boy would drown me in the tub. My fertile, hyperactive imagination was compounded with my fear of the water for exactly the kind of result you'd expect. I would vehemently refuse to get in the water, to my parents' exasperation and my brother's taunts. I sat on the bank, always several feet from the river, when my parents and brother engaged in water-based activities. But a week went by, and I saw no sign of the Riverbank Boy. I was starting to think it had all been a joke by my asinine brother. On the last day of the trip, I resolved to conquer my phobia. My brother and I went to the river, slightly ahead of our parents, who'd said they'd join us in a few minutes. Irresponsible, I know. I often wonder if they could have stopped it if they'd been there. But there's no use in speculating. It only augments the sadness and amplifies the tragedy that transpired. My brother suddenly decided to race me to the water. He was 2 years older, taller and faster, and consequently dusted my ass. He sped around the trees down to the river, over my protestations to wait up. Several seconds later, panting for breath and my sides on fire, I rounded the corner. There was nobody there. Had the Riverbank Boy gotten him? "Derek?" I called out quietly. I took a few cautious steps towards the river. I went to call out Derek's name again when I was interrupted by a shove from behind. Fear gripped every ounce of my being as I fell into the water. It was shallow, probably less than 2 feet, but that was more than enough to go under. I surfaced, coughing and sputtering for breath, terrified that I'd been attacked by the Riverbank Boy. I saw a boy just a couple years older than me, just as Derek had said the Riverbank Boy was. I couldn't clearly make out the rest of his features as my eyes were stung and my vision blurred by the water. My heart pounded in my chest. Fight or flight kicked in. I couldn't exactly flee further into the river, so I was left with one option: fight. I lunged forward, grabbing the Riverbank Boy's leg. He cried out in surprise and toppled into the water. He clearly hadn't been expecting me to fight back. I was on him before he could get back up. He was bigger than me and probably stronger, but I had the advantageous position. Additionally, my strength was undoubtedly greatly improved for the time being as a result of my fight or flight response. I got on top of him and held his head under the water. He cried desperately now. I was beating him at his own game, and he was terrified. One of his hands frantically thrashed above the surface, and a steady stream of bubbles rose to the surface. Until they didn't. I held him under the water until the hand went still, until the bubbles stopped. And even then I didn't back off. I was going to beat the Riverbank Boy. And I thought I had. A horrified, desperate shout snapped me out of the moment. Time, previously at a standstill for me, now flowed freely again. "James!" came my mother's hysteric shout as a pair of large hands, my dad's hands, wrenched me off the Riverbank Boy. I tried to say it was okay, that I was all right and had won. But my parents continued to shout in hysterics as they pulled Derek's lifeless body from the water. The Riverbank Boy was nowhere to be seen. It was horrible after that day. I tried to explain what had happened, that the Riverbank Boy had gotten Derek, and that I had been winning the fight when I was apparently pulled off before I could finish the job. I know I didn't finish the job. How else could he have been gone? How else could he still be stalking me? I was taken to a doctor not long after. I tried to explain, but nobody believed me. I was wrongfully diagnosed as disturbed. It was determined that I had had a break from reality. They had the temerity to say I drowned Derek. That we had been horseplaying in the water and that tragic results had ensued when it got carried away. When I got carried away. Things were a blur for a while after that. The trips to the doctor, the medications, the mixture of pained and angry looks my mere presence elicited. Nobody would have any of it. Nobody believed me that the Riverbank Boy was real, and that it was he who had drowned Derek. As if the disbelief and cold treatment I received wasn't bad enough. The Riverbank Boy was back. He was and still is hell-bent on finishing what was started. He was outside my window every night whenever it rained. I nearly shit myself the first time I saw him and realized he was back. My parents were having none of it. They insisted that it was just my reflection and nothing more. But I knew what was really happening. That monster followed me to summer camp too, always lurking in the pool. He grabbed me and dragged me in one time. But again, nobody believed me. nobody listened. The lifeguard and camp counselor said that Nate Hendricks, the camp's resident bully, had pulled me in. But I know it was the Riverbank Boy. He wanted to drag me to my death into the chlorinated depths of the pool. No lies, no amount of gaslighting could fool me. I refused to go back to camp after that. It was too dangerous. It was downhill from there. I refused to shower or bathe. It was too dangerous. On one harrowing night, I heard him hopping around in the bathroom. He had never gotten inside before. I screamed and screamed and screamed. If it were a movie, I probably would have shattered the light bulb with my piercing scream. But this wasn't a movie. All I got was the last straw from my parents. They said that it had just been the faucet dripping. Why are they so fervent in the maintenance of their bald-faced lies? But despite my continued insistence of the truth, that was the last straw. At 13 years of age, I was institutionalized. I didn't see the Riverbank Boy for the 5 years I spent in that facility. But I knew he was waiting, biding his time until I got out. I got out 2 years ago. I miss the safety of the hospital walls. He couldn't get me in there, but now I see him again. Nobody takes me seriously, same as always. Nobody took me seriously inside the hospital either, but at least I was safe. I refuse to shower or bathe again, and have not done so in months. I avoid all windows religiously when it rains. He's invariably waiting every time. He is always in the corner of my eye, watching, waiting for an opportunity to drown me, just like he drowned Derek years ago. People still refuse to see the truth. They still say that I drowned Derek, but the Riverbank Boy killed my brother. I swear, it wasn't me. Thank you for listening. You can probably handle another horror story, right?